So tell me your name.
I'm Cynthia Denena.
And tell me what your association with Poggioreali is.
My husband's father was born in Poggioreali,
Okay.
Sicily.
And what was his name?
Tony Denena. He didn't have a middle name.
No middle name.
No middle name.
Do you know about when he was born?
He came here in 1913 and he was 5. So it must have been 1908.
1908. Now, when you say he came here, did he come directly here?
Yes. Yes. His mother and his older brother, and he came after the father came.
Okay.
Leonardo Denena was their father, and he came here back and forth. He would come to America and work a while and go back to Poggioreali and go back to Sicily, come over here and work a while and go, like we hear the Mexican people do here now. And finally the mother, Leon's grandmother, said, these boys need their father. They need him wherever he is. So he finally had enough money to bring them here. But he worked for the railroad in Kansas City at that time. She did not want to live in Kansas City. She wanted to live where her people were, where she was kin to somebody. Well, her brother and some other relatives were in the Brazos Bottom. And so she wanted to come where they were. So he gave up his job on the railroad and came to Texas, and they started farming. And of course they were sharecroppers, to begin with. And eventually Leon's grandfather had enough money. They kept their crop one year, which may have been 1 or 2 bales. It may not have been a whole lot. But they kept their crop until they had enough money when they sold it to buy some land. The plantation system was breaking up, or had broken up, but really, because they bought that land, I'd have to go back and see, in the early 30s, I think. I'd have to go back and get an exact date. And they bought it with three other families in strips. It was a part of a plantation. I think it was a woods plantation, but I'm not sure about that. And each family had a strip from front to back because they had to have farmland to live, raise their crops and raise for themselves. And they also had to have woods because everything was wood-fired. So they bought, there were stratas, 2 stratas, and we called them Richie. I think it's DeSharo.
Yes, ma'am.
Something like that. But there were 4 strips that they bought of this plantation. And eventually, Leon's grandfather bought the stratas out, and they came to town, and I think they became carpenters.
Yes, ma'am.
And, because it wasn't but just a few acres, it was a good piece, but it couldn't raise a family, and you couldn't have generations living on them because it wasn't that much land. So Leon's grandfather eventually bought all of those, and except one, the DeSharos, and my father-in-law eventually bought it. But that was in much later, like 1959, 60, it was much later. Well, it was in the early 60s.
And where was that property?
It's on Highway 50, Farm to Market Road 50, between Mumford and Hearn.
Okay. All right.
It's 6 miles from each. And it's a wonderful place.
And it's still in your family?
Yes. Yes. My father-in-law eventually bought more property around to where he accumulated about 1,000 acres.
Yes, ma'am.
And part of it, and he has pasture land and crop land and so forth, like that. And now my son farms it. So it was Leon's grandfather, Leon's father, Leon, and now Lee. So they're on the 4th generation, and he's farms it just fine. Plus a lot of other acres that he rents.
So tell me about your husband.
Leon. Now Leon had a middle name. He was Leonardo Anthony Denena. He had, because if you'll see in that book, it was in another article somewhere I have, where they named the first son after the father's father and the second son after the mother's father and so forth. So Leon got to be named after his grandfather, Leonardo. And he farmed all his life, the same farm. He had intended to be a petroleum engineer and got a business degree, went to work for an oil company, and he thought, why am I doing this? I don't understand, why am I doing this? So he came home and started farming with his dad.
Was Leon born on the farm, or was he?
In Marlin. Everybody went to Marlin in those days to the doctors. There was a great medical center in Marlin at that time.
Yes, ma'am. And then, but he lived most of his life in
On the farm, yes. Yes, his young life, yes.
Yes, ma'am. And when you and Mr. Lee married, did you live in the farm?
Eventually, we started out in Bremond. Well, Leon and his dad had bought a huge place up there, and we farmed it for a number of years until my father-in-law died in 1968. And then after that, we moved to the farm where the home, what we call the home place. It was there on Highway Farm Road 50, and we lived there for a number of years, and then eventually moved into Bryan.
Okay. When were you first aware of their ancestry being from Poggioreali?
Oh my, I don't know. I really can't say a certain period of time.
But growing up in Hearn, there were a great number of people from Poggioreali, correct?
I'm assuming, I really don't know for sure if they were all from the same or not, but a great many of them, because they were all farmers, and that's what they did in Poggioreali. They farmed.
Yes, ma'am.
And so I would assume that a great many of them, yes, but there may have been some from other towns also, you know, Salaputra, or I can't pronounce it.
Salabaruta.
Yeah, and Corleone and different, you know, little towns around, but basically the same
In that
area.
area. And tell me, when was the first time you went to Poggioreali?
I've only been once, but Leon's cousins, the Falsones, decided they wanted to have a family reunion there. So there were only 19 of us, so that was only a small portion of his cousins on the Falsone side. But we all met at we rented a villa, and it was behind walls, and there was one house here and one house here. You know, it was two structures. So there was room for 19 people. Of course, every time I got up, there was somebody else sleeping on a couch, you know, that came in from somewhere. But we rented that place for a week. I think we were there a week, and then we went on to the Amalfi Coast after that. But we did day trips. We had guides and drivers and did day trips from this little, and I would like to think of the town we were staying in, because one of the cousins wanted to look at the seashore, so we had to be on the sea. One of them wanted to be close enough to go out to eat, so we had to be close enough to a town to go out to eat. I mean, whoever put this trip together satisfied all of those people, and how they did it is amazing. But it was not in Poggioreali. We did not stay there. It was another little town. And if I'd thought about it, I would have looked that up, but I don't remember offhand.
It's common for people to stay in Castellamare. Was it Castellamare?
No, it started with, I don't know. I can't tell you right now. And anyway, one of the day trips was to Poggioreali. We only got to go there that one day. And we went to the old city, you know, the old town, and walked around and looked and enjoyed seeing what was left.
Yes, ma'am. About what year was that?
Oh, it's been about 10 years.
So the bell tower was not there at that time. It had already fallen.
No, it had already fallen, I do believe.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh-huh.
Okay. And tell me, from your experience, what did Mr. Lee and everybody was there, what did they think of the old town?
They really didn't think one way or another. They seemed to be more interested in a lot of different places in Sicily rather than just that one spot.
Yes, ma'am.
But I remember one of his cousins were saying, I can hear them talking to me. And so I think she thought her ancestors were
Speaking to
were
her.
speaking to her. But I thought it was fantastic. Now Leon was very impressed.
Yes, ma'am.
He even found a fig tree that was still, it was as tall as the building, and he tried to bring home some cuttings from that to root at home, but it didn't work out. But he was really impressed, and what amazed him is he thought they had always lived in like hovels, huts, and he thought they must have been totally impoverished. And when he walked into this ancient city, he was like, they have houses. They had mosaics, and they had paintings and on the ceilings, and he was astounded. He thought they had, were very primitive. And it was really nice at one time, at one point in time. But they all had to farm outside the city.
Yes, ma'am.
And so they, the husband or the brothers and whoever would be farming would have to go out in the weekday and farm and then come back. And they would have like 3 hectares, whatever that is, of land. And that does not support a family of 8.
No, ma'am.
No. So some of them were brave enough to leave. And of course, then after the earthquake in 1968, they all left. And the ones that, the Denenas that were left did not come here. They went to Australia. But they fared well there. But what's ironic is my father-in-law died that weekend of the earthquake.
No, my goodness.
We were just astounded. One of his dad's brothers from Kansas City, Carl Denena, was there with us for the funeral, and we turned on the TV and there was the earthquake. It was spooky, because he was gone and it was too.
Oh. Tell me, what was it like being married into the Poggioreali community? Were the people very close? Were they farmed together? They had events together? Do you remember?
Oh yes, certainly. When I was in high school, we had a very good principal. He was very understanding. And on St. Joseph's altar days, they had them, even if it was the day of the week, they had it on St. Joseph's Day. And we'd skip school. And I'd go right with them. But he knew where we were. It was, and it amazed me that you could go from out there on Highway 50, you could go from house to house to house to house, and everybody had their own altar. And you ate in the backyard. They had wash tubs of sauce and pasta, and on wood fire underneath. It just amazed me, absolutely. It was something I have always remembered, and I will always go to one if I can find it, because I have a passion for that.
Were there other traditions that you remember?
Yes, foods mainly. Like cannolis and, of course, spaghetti and meatballs every Sunday, and things like that. But mainly foods. As traditions, they were were American and very patriotic and very good citizens.
Yes, ma'am. Now, did you go to St. Salvador? Did you go to the church in Hearn, or did you go to St. Anthony's?
I went, when?
Well, explain to me the progression.
Churches.
Yeah, explain the progression then.
Well, when I was at home, my mother and daddy lived between the Methodist and Baptist church, and I went to both of those. Well, the Episcopal church was behind us. I went to that one, and the Catholic church
So you're
was behind
describing
that. I went everywhere.
Is that Hearn, or is that?
In Hearn.
Yes, ma'am.
Anywhere that anybody was singing, I would go. And the Church of Christ had singing on Wednesday night, and they sang a cappella. I went to all of them. But I always was interested in Catholicism ever since I was very, very small.
Yes, ma'am.
So after we married, I converted to Catholicism easily. It was fine.
Something that you would tell your grandkids?
Something I would tell my grandchildren is, first of all, I would read them some excerpts out of these different things that I have accumulated about the Sicilian people. and how, their background and what all. I tell you what amazed me about Sicily probably more than anything is the enormous different cultures that have come, it's like they were, well, they're in the middle of the ocean, and they're in between countries. They have been conquered by so many different cultures that their culture is an accumulation of vast amount. I mean, we saw things that were written by the Vikings on walls in caves. We saw things that were Norman English, at buildings and churches and things. We saw things and lots of Arab influence, huge Arab influence, and Spanish influence. Because I said, oh, look, there are cactus growing out there. And they said, yeah, the Spanish brought that, Because it shocked me that there were things we see in Texas. Sicily is it's a very unusual place, but it's very nice. It has a constant temperature, so their wine is good every year.
Yes, ma'am.
It doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too, well, it gets warm, but it doesn't get too hot and it doesn't get too cold. But their background is so and the Greeks, the Rome, it just goes on and on to make a Sicilian that it's incredible.
That's why the food is so good, right?
Maybe so. Because they've got all of these little touches from all of these different places, yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
And food is a big deal.
It is the culture. Tell me, at this point in your life, looking back, what do you remember about the Sicilian culture here in Texas and in Bryan?
I guess what attracted me the most was they're funny. For one thing, they're extremely friendly. They're extreme, and they always remember you. If you meet somebody, they're going to know you the next time. And of course, when I was growing up, there were many families there in Hearn, and they were so close. I was an only child, and that to me was amazing that all of these families were so close. And of course, ours was too, but there weren't that many of us. And I just enjoyed their joie de vivre. Their spirits and everything about just the friendliness. They accepted you. They wanted to do things for you. They wanted to love you. Everybody was just. It's just incredible that you could be a part of them, and you were just like them as far as they were concerned.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
I thought so.